So next, I'd like to welcome Betsy Sparrow. Betsy is an assistant professor of psychology at Columbia University. She does research on the function of conscious will and authorship processing and the effects of priming and how to overcome them. But today she's going to be talking to us on a different topic, involving creative or analytical and creative thinking online.
Okay. Hi, thanks for coming. Yes, that's what I'm going to be talking to you about. So I'm going to start out by telling you how I started to think about this research. But first, I'll give you an overview. So first, I'm going to talk really briefly about just this idea of transactive memory and being online all the time, and how our computers and our smartphones have become kind of a transactive memory source for us. Then I'll be talking about analytical thinking. So what do we believe, or how analytical are we when we evaluate materials online? And then finally, is this process of not remembering things so much ourselves and kind of transferring the responsibility to online information systems possibly have a benefit of allowing us to be more creative in our thinking? Okay? Okay. So the kind of basic questions as far as the agency and belief is if people look things up online. We do know about the filter bubble and all that kind of stuff. But when they kind of feel a sense of control, as you do when you put something into a search bar, are they more likely to believe what they read, or are they less likely to believe what they read if they feel like they're in control of the process? We actually didn't know the answer to this question when we did this study. And then secondly, as far as creativity is concerned, if we aren't, so much of our school system is based on kind of memorizing facts, right, and kind of regurgitating things. That's something I've never been particularly good at. So one of the reasons I was interested in this kind of line of research is that, it's possible that maybe if you don't think so much about the details, right, and you're thinking more about the kind of forest, to use an overused metaphor, maybe you're more likely to be creative in your thinking. And then finally, just some kind of nerdy stuff about explicit and implicit memory and how that relates to these types of creative problem solving. Okay? Okay. So all of this research started when I was sitting in my living room watching this movie called Gaslight. Have you guys seen it? Okay, so it's where this term gaslighting comes from, right? If somebody's trying to drive you crazy, and it stars Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman. But at one point, this woman came up on the screen. She's playing the chambermaid of this married couple. And I looked at her and I said, God, I know I've seen her before. Right now, what did I do? Right, I'm a modern person, so I pulled out IMDb and I typed in Gaslight and I looked to see who it was. And I was like, oh my God, that's Angela Lansbury. And just brought back all these memories of mothballs and being in my grandparents' house and being babysat and having to watch this damn show. So anyway, but I thought to myself, I never would have made this connection. I mean, look at the difference, right? I mean, she's just so much older and she looks so different. And so I turned to my husband and basically said this, how did we get the answers to these type of questions, right? And so. At first we came to this conclusion, right? We just never would have found out. And so my husband was like, oh, well, maybe we would have called somebody, or we would have taken, we used to have this huge book called The Video Dog. Any of you guys have that with like old movies and stuff? And I said, I don't know if she was a big enough character, for us to have ever figured this out. And then it kind of occurred to me, my advisor, Dan Wegner, had this theory that he hadn't really taken very far, which is this idea of transactive memory. Which is this idea that basically we have these other people in our lives, and they know things that we don't know, but we know the kinds of things that they know, right? So for example, if I want to know some sort of, I like watching sports, I like watching baseball, but since I do science all day long, I'm actually not into statistics and all that kind of stuff as far as baseball is concerned. I just like watching them run around the bases and that kind of thing. But if I want to know something, I ask my husband, because I know he knows sports facts, right? And when I ask him, I don't remember it, right? Because I know I can just keep asking him again until he, slaps me or something. So that's kind of the idea. is that the original idea of transactive memory is that we have these people in our networks, in our real lives, so people who are significant others, people who are in our workplaces, right? So people that we know not exactly what they know, we just know the kinds of things that they know, right? And so then we assign responsibility to them for knowing those things, right? And so that's one of the reasons why, amongst many others, that it's very hard to either, say, divorce someone, that you've been with a long time, or have them pass away, because you don't have half of your brain anymore, right? And so as I was talking to my husband about this, I said, I really think the internet has become maybe our primary source of transactive memory at this point, right? We just go online and look up things whenever we want to know the answer. So I went in the next day and started these studies. So the 3 questions that I was asking in these original studies was, one, is it not just me, right? So, anecdote is anecdote, but let's do some science. So, do people actually think about their computer when they don't know the answer to something, right? So that seems pretty obvious, especially now when we all whip out our phones all the time and all that kind of thing. But just to make sure, we tested that. And then secondly, does the computer as transactive memory follow the same patterns as human transactive memory systems, such that the things that we know other people know, we don't bother to internally encode because we know we can just keep looking again and again, right? So do people not remember things when they know they can look it up anytime they want, okay? And then third, are we changing the way we remember things? So since there's so much information online, right? There's so much kind of data to go through. It seems to me that it would be advantageous to remember where to find information. If we can look it up over and over again, the thing that we should remember is where to go, where to do that quickly and how to do that quickly. Okay? You with me? All right. I know I'm a really fast talker. Okay, so for the first question, do people automatically think about computers when they don't know the answers to things? We gave people 2 blocks of questions. One was a difficult block, which I call my anxiety dream block. So that's like when you're suddenly taking a test in a subject you've never studied before, right? So these are those kind of questions. Basically, people don't know the answers to these. They're yes and no questions. You get like 50%. They're guessing. Then you have what I call the Fredo questions, right? Godfather? Okay, so he was the dumb brother. Okay, so my 7-year-old, or when I first started giving this talk, my 5-year-old could answer these questions, okay? So everybody gets these right. So first they have a block of questions, and then they do what's called the modified Stroop. So I'm just gonna tell you what the Stroop is, just really quickly. So you can see these top 2 words here, they agree with each other, right? So the color and the word are the same. So it's not hard to say that this is red. It's not hard to say this is blue. But if you have to say the color name here, it's hard because blue overrides red in the different modalities. Reading overcomes the color of the font, okay? So it sets up a conflict. So people start to trip up when they have to do this really quickly because they want to say the color word and not the actual color itself, okay? Because it's in conflict with each other. Now, you can modify this as long as you give people a cognitive load and use the words that you're interested in. So what we should see in this type of task, so you give people a 5-digit number they have to memorize, it flashes up on the screen really quickly, they look at it, then the word comes up, so it could be Google or Yahoo or Target or Nike, a bunch of other things, and they have to say whether it's red or blue, really quickly. So if they go too slow, they're not counted in the data, and they don't get to keep going on. And then they have to report on the 5-digit number so that we know that they're actually being impacted by this cognitive load, okay? And so when you do that, what you would expect to see if somebody has something on their mind, right? So if they kind of have an idea activated, that word, so let's say they're thinking about Google because they want to know the answers to those questions, right? Then they should be a little slower at saying red in this example. Because the word is on their mind, okay? So it's kind of the opposite of priming to a certain extent. It's priming to give them longer reaction times, okay? You with me? All right. So here's what we got. So basically, you can see here in the results. So for the general words, these are words like Target and Nike and a whole bunch of other things that were matched for commonality in the English language, frequency English language and whatnot. There's no difference between the two. So after the easy block of questions or after the hard block of questions, it took them equally long to answer the color right? So those words weren't particularly relevant to them. But as soon as you get to the computer words, you can see a bump up, especially after the hard block of questions, right? So that suggests that they are thinking about the computer, right? So they are thinking about Google, they're thinking about Yahoo, they're thinking about the computer, they're thinking about mouse and all these other words that we used. We also got a little bit of an effect for after the easy questions. So this suggests that just knowledge itself activates the computer for people, even if they do know the answers to things. But of course, the effect is not as great, okay? Okay, and just to be cute, the one word that kept people from naming the color, the one that took them the longest to name the color was Google. So at least back when we did that study. Okay, so the second question, do people tend to remember things if they can look it up over and over again? We had people type into just a dialog box, these different trivia statements, right? So the trivia statement came up on the top of the screen, they just had to type it in. And then after, on the bottom, some people, they believed if they clicked it, it would be saved, okay? So they would have access to it again, right? So they would have access to it again like you would have access to it again if you had access to the internet, okay? Other people thought it would be erased each time. So that would be having non-access, right? So that you couldn't look it up again because you wouldn't have it available to you. And then the other, although this didn't end up making a difference, the other thing we asked them to do, so half the people in each of those groups, we told them, really try to remember this, right? So we gave them this cue to really try to remember. In the other group, we didn't say anything. And here's what we got here. So you can see there's no difference in whether we tried to ask them to remember it or not. The main thing that had an impact, or the only thing that had an impact, was whether they thought the information would be saved so that they would have access to it again, or they thought they wouldn't. And so you can see that people internally encoded and kept it, they remembered more if they thought it wouldn't be accessible compared to when they thought that it would. So again, this suggests that people don't remember things that they think they can look up again over and over again. I think we all have examples of this in our lives, so this isn't a particularly surprising finding either, I think. The third one, I think, is the most interesting one. So in this third study, basically the same idea, but now we dropped all the erased, saved type of thing. So now everyone thinks that all this information is going to be saved, but we added a complication in that, and then very subtly, it just said underneath the thing that they typed, this will be saved in the facts folder, or the data folder, or the info folder. Okay, so very generic names that we actually randomly assign these, although we didn't actually put them anywhere, but we randomly assign these into the different folders, okay? So what we wanted to know is, what do they remember now, right? Do they remember the facts that they typed in? And if you, I'll just go back for a second. These are pretty memorable. Like I didn't know Snow White was originally a blonde. I had no idea an ostrich's eye was bigger than his brain, or that John Lennon was legally blind. So these are like really memorable trivia statements. These are really not memorable folder names. I actually have to look at the screen to remember what they are. So they type in the statement. It says it's going to be saved in the ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain. It's going to be saved into the facts folder, for example. Then afterwards, after they do 30 of these, they have to recall it, right? So they have to write it down on a piece of paper. And then after that, we have to give them a cue for the folder. So we say, what folder was the statement about the ostrich saved in? And they have to type it in. Now, we never told them there were 5 folders or reminded them again what the folders were. So I actually wasn't particularly confident that they were going to remember these at all. But let's see what we've got. So just overall, their memory for the statements themselves is lower than their memory for the folders, so where they were saved. Now this isn't, this looks awesome and all of that, but you do have to remember that they had 30 statements and they had only 5 folders to remember. Although, like I said, we didn't point that out to them. So this is cool, but I think this is even more illustrative. So you would think that, as far as we know memory works, as you have more cues to remember something, you should then remember it better, right? You have more kind of different times so that you can elaborate it, or the cues can call it up. So you would think that the people who typed the statement, an ostrich's eye is bigger than his brain, when they're then cued with the statement, would remember the folder, right? Because they have kind of a double cue there compared to the people who don't remember it in the first place. And so you would expect this analysis, so if they remember the statement about the ostrich, they should also remember where it's saved, and you can see that that's actually not the case. So these two here, remembering both the statement and the folder, or just the statement are the lowest two bars here. And so these are not different from each other. The thing they did the most, these equal, statistically equal, is nothing, right? So that's not particularly surprising. But the second thing, which I think is really interesting, is that they remember where to find it, particularly when they don't remember the thing itself. Okay, so that I think needs to be studied further, but really kind of a cool result in that domain. Okay, I guess no questions, yeah, right? Okay, so all right, so let me just go right into the belief stuff. So we have those three questions at least partially answered. So people do remember, or people do think about the computer when they don't know the answers to things. They don't remember things because it's kind of like a transactive memory system, with people. And one of the things I like to emphasize is the computer is actually a transactive memory system with other people. It's just a different segue to that, right? It actually allows you to have a much larger transactive memory system with a great number of people that you maybe never will ever meet. Obviously, most likely will never meet, but it's only a conduit to other people, right? I mean, there's nothing that's put online that isn't put online by people. I mean, it's not like some web is just dropping down information for us to know. Okay, so what does that mean about belief? So there was this. Do you guys remember this headline? There was this teacher in England who he set up this website, and then he told his students, these grade school students, that there had been found a new species of octopus, or a new type of octopus. And this octopus did not live in water, it lived in trees, okay? Now, yeah, I can hear all the chuckles in the crowd. So he gave them this assignment that they had to go home and do research on this tree octopus, okay? So of course, when they put in tree octopus to search for it, they came up with his website, which is complete bullshit. And then they came back, and then of course, they did their reports on this, and then the headlines all over the place were, oh my God, school children are so stupid. They believe that a tree octopus exists, and they'll just believe anything that they read online. Now, being a psychologist, you can see a whole bunch of confounding factors here. One is that this is their teacher, right? So hopefully this is somebody that they can trust with the truth, if they're not, in a creationist school or something like that. So, I hope there aren't any creationists here. Okay. So the idea that they believe what they read online is not necessarily the thing that's going on here. They believe their teacher, okay? Yeah, okay. So we wanted to look at that and to see, are actually people this gullible? Are people getting dumber, as Nicholas Carr wants to tell us kind of over and over again. And so one thing we do know is that people tend to believe things are true by comprehending them, right? So just comprehending something, you think you believe it. It takes an extra step for us to disbelieve things, okay? But we also know that once we tend to kind of own things, or once we've chosen something and we prefer it, then it has a different quality for us, right? So people like lottery tickets that they buy themselves. Cognitive dissonance changes, how you prefer things. So that those processes could mean that, this agency that we're, imparting on people, so that having them be in control of their own search process could actually make them believe things more, okay? Or it could be that agency kind of bumps you up a level. It does, and takes you to that second stage, right, where you're correcting for that initial automatic belief, because it's engaging a more controlled systematic process. Okay, so what we did was we gave people trivia statements. In this case, they were all true. First, we asked them how much control did they feel, so this is kind of a manipulation check. So they saw a bunch of trivia statements like this. They read them, and they had to say how much control they felt. Now, the manipulation is that they had this blind choice. They chose 1, 2, or 3. So this is a much more impoverished level of agency than people would feel when they're doing a search, right? Or they were just assigned something, or they were told this is just random, okay? And so you can see the agency manipulation works. So when they even just kind of blindly chose, they didn't know what they were going to get because of this A, B, and C choice. They felt more agency than in the other 2 cases. And then the second question we asked them, do you believe this information is true? Kind of same thing here. And what you see is that the people who chose. So even though this is very, like I said, a really impoverished level of agency, they were much more skeptical and analytical in their evaluation of the material than the people who had been assigned the material or it had been randomly assigned, okay? So this is more belief, okay? So this is kind of the kids with the tree octopus. And this is kind of the rest of us laughing at the kids in the tree octopus, okay? Okay, so then that was a lab sample. So now we wanted to see if this happened in the general world. We've moved into, kind of looking outside of college students. So this is a Mechanical Turk study that just basically replicates this. This time there's true and false statements. Kind of same thing here. So they just blindly choose. We tell them which one they chose, and they get a statement. The electric chair was invented by an accountant. 1 minute, okay. And I'm just going to, I don't care about it. So then they're either randomly assigned, so basically the same thing. So we get the same thing here for agency. When they choose something, when they feel like they're in control, they have responsibility for what they're doing, they feel more agency, and they also are more skeptical, right? So it seems that they're more analytical. I'm going to skip this because I really want to show you the problem-solving stuff. So the creativity stuff is based on a whole bunch of things, which I'm not going to get into because I just want to show you the results. Okay, so basically we manipulated whether people could solve these Klondike problems. So basically those kind of problems that you read them and you either get it or you don't, right? And most of the time you don't get it because you're blocked by your usual way of thinking, right? So our idea is if people aren't blocked by their usual way of thinking because they haven't memorized all the details of the problem, then they should be better able to solve them. So we gave them 10 insight problems. Some people thought that they were going to see they read them all, everybody read them all. Some people thought they weren't going to see all the information again. They didn't know what. Other people did believe. So again, we're manipulating accessibility, so whether the problem was accessible or not to them later, or whether they thought it was going to be accessible or not to them later is actually the thing. So this is one of the problems. So there's two strangers. One says, I have to confess I don't always speak the truth, and I added in these totally irrelevant details. The first one's wearing black jeans, the second one's wearing a red cashmere hat, and that's what I took out. So that's the only thing I took out when they saw it the second time. So actually, everybody got the problems again, and they just had different expectations going in, okay? And then what we looked at was both their solve rate and then how much they had implicit memory for the detailed words that I had taken out, okay? So that would suggest they had memorized the problem as opposed to try to solve it. And so here you can see that it does make a difference. So the people who believed the problem would be totally accessible to them again later, they solved more problems than the people who didn't. And the people who didn't believe the problems would be accessible to them later, they had greater reaction times. I'm sorry, the people who did believe the problems would be accessible to them later had faster reaction times to those detailed words like red, cashmere, blue, black jeans, that kind of thing. So this suggests that implicit memory is actually greater for the people who didn't memorize the problem, which is interesting. Then we replicated this on Mechanical Turk. Okay, I've got like 30 seconds, same thing, except this time we asked them explicitly what was the first stranger wearing, what color was it, and we asked, so we asked them just to type in what the response was. So we get the same level of problem solving difference, and here is where it flips. So you actually get more explicit memory for the details when you believe them they're not going to be accessible to you later, okay? And that is inversely correlated with the number of problems that they solved compared to the people who thought the details would be accessible. So this does suggest that memorizing things does inhibit your creativity, and this makes sense because we know that working memory the more you have in working memory, the less you're able to be creative, right? So it actually enhances analytical problem solving, but not creative problem solving. And there's a really great correlation there between the two. Okay, so am I over time? Okay, so thank you. I always have way too much data.